My family stopped calling on a Thursday, and I know it was a Thursday because I had been marking the days in a notebook I kept beside my bed during the first month after I left. The way people mark things when they are trying to find patterns in pain and haven't yet accepted that some pain doesn't have a pattern, it just has a cost. The calls didn't stop dramatically. There was no final argument, no door slammed goodbye, no sentence that announced itself as the last one. They just thinned out. The way daylight thins in November, gradually, then completely. Until one day you look up and realize the light has been gone for a while and you weren't watching closely, enough to catch the exact moment it went. 4 years of that silence, 4 years of building a life in the dark of my family's disapproval, in a city that didn't know my name when I arrived and eventually learned it on my own terms. And then my grandfather died, and a lawyer called, and inside the will was something my grandfather had written that my family had no idea was coming, something that said, in the clearest possible language a legal document can speak, that one person in this family had been watching the whole time, had been watching with the full weight of his attention, and had decided quietly and permanently to put that attention into something nobody could take back. Stay with me, because what was in that will didn't just change what I owned, it changed what my family was, forced to finally understand about the years they had spent looking in the wrong direction. If you've ever been cut off by the people who were supposed to be your foundation, subscribe right now, because this story is about what grows in the space they leave behind. I left home at 24, and the leaving was not spontaneous. It was the conclusion of a process that had been building for several years, the way geological pressure builds before the ground finally moves. I had grown up in a family organized around a very specific definition of the right life, and the right life looked like this: stay close to home, enter a stable and legible profession, marry appropriately, participate in the family's social ecosystem in the ways the family's social ecosystem required. My 2 older sisters had done these things with varying degrees of enthusiasm and were rewarded with the particular warm inclusion that my family reserved for people who confirmed its assumptions about how things should go. I had not done these things, not because I was rebellious in any dramatic sense, but because I was simply and completely a different kind of person than the life my family had designed had room for. I was a writer, not aspirationally and actually, in the way that means you cannot imagine doing anything else and have stopped pretending you can. I had been writing since I was 11 years old, filling notebooks with the specific, obsessive energy of someone who had found the thing that made them most fully themselves, and could not put it down regardless of how impractical it was, regardless of how many times I was told it wasn't a real career, regardless of how completely my family treated it as a phase that would eventually give way to something sensible. By 22, I had published small pieces in literary magazines. That meant nothing to my parents and everything to me. By 23, I had a manuscript I believed in. By 24, I had been offered a residency in a city 4 hours away, a year of funded writing time at a small arts organization, the kind of opportunity that comes once and doesn't offer a rain check. And I took it. And the taking was the fracture. My father said I was choosing uncertainty over stability, and that he couldn't support that. My mother said she was disappointed in the clearest way possible without using the word disappointed. She used silence instead, which in her language was louder. My sisters said things designed to sound like concern that were actually something closer to relief that the family's most inconvenient member was removing herself from the situation. Nobody said don't go. Nobody said we'll miss you. Nobody said we love you even though we don't understand this. They just let me go with the specific, pointed absence of warmth that communicates, more clearly than any argument, that your absence is preferable to your presence as you actually are. I drove 4 hours with my manuscript and my notebooks and a plant I had kept alive for 3 years that I was not willing to leave behind. And I moved into the residency housing, and I started the year that would eventually, though I didn't know it yet, become the foundation of everything. I finished the manuscript. I found an agent by the end of the residency year. The novel sold 2 years later, not to a large publisher, not for life-changing money, but to a small press with a real readership and a genuine commitment to the kind of work I was doing, and I held the contract in my hands and called the one person I wanted to tell first. My grandfather's name was Edmund. He was 78, and he had been a high school English teacher for 31 years before retiring. And he was the only member of my family who had read everything I had ever written, not politely, not performatively, but with the genuine attention of a man who understood what he was reading and knew how to talk about it afterward. He was the one who had given me my first real notebook at 11 years old, the serious kind with the hardcover, telling me that tools matter and that a writer deserved proper tools. He was the one who slipped me a folded note at a family dinner once that said only, "Don't let them talk you out of the thing that makes you most yourself." He was the one, in 4 years of family silence, who called every 2 weeks without fail, who asked about the work rather than around it, who read the early pages of the novel over the phone with me line by line in the way of a man who had spent 31 years teaching young people that language was the most serious business there was. When he died in his sleep in January, the family called me. It was the first call I had received from any of them in over a year, and it came from my mother, who delivered the news in the careful, brief tone of someone discharging an obligation, and told me the funeral was Saturday. I came. I drove 4 hours and sat in a church with people who had spent 4 years treating my existence as an inconvenience, and I said goodbye to the one person in the room I had never needed to explain myself to. And I did not cry until I was back in my car, and then I cried for a long time. If you have ever lost the one person in your family who truly saw you, comment Edmund below, because that specific grief has no adequate category and no standard comfort. And this story is carrying it the whole way through. The will was read 10 days later. I had been told to come, which surprised me, because the assumption I had been operating under was that 4 years of family silence had communicated something legally definitive about where I stood. I sat in a lawyer's office beside my mother and my 2 sisters and an uncle I barely knew, and the lawyer, a careful, unhurried man named Mr. Ibarra, opened a folder and began. My uncle received the car. My mother received the furniture she had been promised. My sisters received small, monetary bequests and specific items of jewelry my grandmother, who had died years before, had left in my grandfather's care. The house, which was the most significant asset, went into a structured arrangement that provided my mother with the right to certain proceeds from its sale. Then Mr. Ibarra turned a page and looked up directly at me and said, "There is a separate provision, added 14 months ago, addressed specifically to Edmund's granddaughter." He looked at the room. He asked that it be read with the family present. My mother's hands shifted in her lap. My older sister looked at the table. The room held its breath in the specific way of people who sense that what is coming is going to require something from them they have not prepared. Mr. Ibarra read it. My grandfather's voice came through. The legal language, the way his voice always came through. Everything he wrote, with precision and warmth and the specific, unhurried authority of a man who had spent his life choosing words carefully and had saved his most important choosing for this. He wrote that he had watched his granddaughter leave a family that did not yet understand what it had and build a life that demonstrated daily what it had lost by not paying attention. He wrote that he had read her work for years and that it was the real thing, which he defined as writing that told the truth about human experience in language, that made readers feel less alone, and that this was not a small thing and had never been a small thing, and he was not going to pretend otherwise to manage anyone's comfort. He wrote that the investment account he had opened in my name 7 years ago, 7 years, before I had even left, before the residency, before the silence, had been funded monthly since then from his personal savings, and that it was mine entirely, without condition except for one sentence. That was not a condition but an instruction from a man who knew me well enough to know I didn't need conditions. Keep writing. The account held $193,000. 7 years. He had started it before I left, which meant he had seen this coming before I had. He had looked at me at 11 years old with a notebook and understood something about who I was and what it was going to cost me to be that person inside this family. And he had quietly, privately, with no announcement, started building something that would make the cost survivable. He had never told me, he had never told anyone. He had just kept building it. Every month, for 7 years. The way he kept showing up on the phone every 2 weeks. With the patient, unconditional certainty of a man who had decided the work was worth supporting before the work had proven itself, because he understood, better than anyone else in the room had ever bothered to understand, that the proof was not the point. I want to be honest about what happened in my body when Mr. Ibarra finished reading, because I think the honest version is more useful than the composed version. My hands were shaking. Not visibly, I was holding them very still in my lap, but inside the stillness, they were shaking with the particular vibration of someone receiving something so large that the body doesn't know what category to file it under. Grief and gratitude arrived simultaneously and could not be sorted from each other, because the man who had built this thing was gone, and the thing he had built was here, and the gap between those two, facts, was not something the moment had room to resolve. My mother spoke first. She said, in a voice I had not heard from her before, not managed, not careful, just raw in the specific way of a woman who has just been shown, in the most formal and irrevocable possible language, that she missed something she should not have missed. He never told us. I said, "No, he didn't," she said. "He must have known we wouldn't understand." I said, "He knew you didn't. He kept calling me anyway." It was the most honest thing I had said to my mother in 4 years, and I said it without heat, without agenda, just as the plain truth it was. And she received it that way, not defensively but quietly, with the particular silence of a woman sitting inside a correction she had been handed by a dead man's lawyer and could not argue with. My older sister asked carefully why he hadn't said anything to any of them, and I thought about my grandfather, about the 31 years of teaching, about the note he had slipped me at a family dinner, about every phone call in 4 years of silence. And I said, because saying it would have made it about him and about the family. He wanted it to be about me, about the work. That's why he waited until he couldn't be in the room for the reaction. My sister looked at the table. Nobody had a response to this, because it was accurate and complete and left no available counter. We did not reconcile over coffee afterward. I want to be truthful about that, because the clean narrative would have us all sitting in a cafe, having the conversation we'd avoided for 4 years, and the truth is we stood in the parking lot in the January cold for 11 minutes and exchanged the kind of words people exchange when they don't yet know how to exchange the real ones. My mother said she had missed me, which was the most she had offered in 4 years, and which I accepted, without either diminishing it or inflating it beyond its current size. My father, who had not come to the reading but called me that evening, said he had not known about the account, and then said, after a long pause, "He always understood you better than I did." Another pause. "I think I'd like to try to change that, Omevani." Words at the end of a sentence that had taken 4 years and a dead man's legal document to arrive, and I told him I was willing, which was the truest thing I had to offer. I used the money in the way my grandfather's instruction asked me to, which is to say I used it to keep writing, to buy time specifically, which is the only thing money can give a writer that actually matters. I left the job I had been doing to pay rent while I wrote at night and took 2 years to write the second book, the one that had been living in me since before the first one was finished. That book was published last spring. It received the kind of attention the first one hadn't, and my grandfather's name is in the acknowledgments. Second sentence, because he is the first person I would have called, and the absence of him on the day the reviews came in was a specific and permanent thing that no good news has been able to fill. My family and I are different now, not restored, not repaired to some earlier version that may not have ever existed, in the form I would have needed, but different in the way that things become different, when the truth has been said in a room and everyone in it was present for it and nobody could redirect it to something more comfortable. My mother reads my books. She has not told me they are good, which I don't need, but she asks specific questions about them that tell me she read closely, which I do. My father calls on the first Sunday of every month, a habit he established without announcing it and has kept without fail for 2 years, and the calls have gotten longer and more honest in the incremental way of someone learning a language they should have started earlier and is making up for lost time with consistency rather than speed. I kept the notebook my grandfather gave me at 11 years old, the hard-covered one, the serious kind, because tools matter and a writer deserves proper tools. It sits on my desk now, finished years ago, every page full, beside the current one that is also filling. I think about him when I open it, not with the sharp grief of the early months, but with the particular, settled warmth of someone who was loved, carefully and specifically, and in ways that outlasted the person doing the loving. He built something 7 years before. I needed it because he could see far enough ahead to understand that I was going to need it. And he trusted me enough to build it without telling me, because telling me would have made it about the money rather than about the message. The message was this: I see you. I have always seen you. I am building something that says so, in a language nobody can argue with. Keep writing. I kept writing. If this story moved something real in you, if you've had a person who saw you clearly when everyone else was looking away, or built something quietly that only showed itself when it was needed most, tell me in the comments which moment landed hardest. The 2-week phone calls, the 7 years, or the instruction at the end of the letter. I read every single one. Subscribe now for more raw, real, unforgettable stories about the people who love us in ways that outlast them. Hit that notification bell so you never miss the next story. And stay close, because what I'm bringing you next is even more powerful than this, and you do not want to miss a single word.